Hello, this is Hooked by Happenstance. I'm Kendra, and it is time for chapter 33 of Yarn Tales. Today we're on a vacation location here at the beautiful Milford Lake, which you can see behind me. So if you are unfamiliar with Yarn Tales, it is my ongoing series here at Hooked by Happenstance where I read books, I tell you a bit about them, and then I apply silly Kendra rules to my reading of them, and I add a segment to my reading shawl. Now today we're going to talk about another book that I read during Fantasy-a-thon a little while ago, which means that we get to add some beads today, but we'll get to that. That's the exciting part. The rest of this is not very exciting, mostly because of the book in question. So the book that I read for my 33rd endeavor this year was The Magician King by Leif Grossman, and I was really excited to read this book. If you heard my Yarn Tales previously about the first book in the series, The Magicians, I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. There were some things about it that I felt a little skeezy about, and I'd even kind of looked into the author to make sure there was nothing questionable that had been talked about, and I, at the time, found nothing. And I still have found nothing about the author, but there's been some things about the book. So I wanted to get back into the world, and I was all on board with doing that. So we pick up this book with Quentin in Fillory, which is like the fantasy land. He's magician kinging it up, whatever. And that part, I mean, it was fine. It was an interesting story, but there's a dual story in this book that follows Julia, who is his, friend from high school. When Quentin is picked to go to wizard school, Julia is with him, and she is determined to be non-magical by their little test. She even meets up with him in the first book, and they again determine that she does not belong at their magic school. So she goes like the hardcore route of teaching herself magic through like all of these means. So you're reading the story of Quentin and what's happening to him in Fillory, and then at the same time alternating chapters how Julia like bootstrapped her way into wizardry. And that was really interesting, and Julia is a way more interesting character than Quentin. There's more depth, more drama, more everything. So I was still really into this book. It was definitely going to be 4. It had the potential to be a 5-star book. And then it became the 1-star book that it is. So in the second to last chapter, there is a gratuitous, unnecessary sexual assault. Completely unnecessary and disgusting and graphic, and you don't see it coming, and I was not a fan. To the point where I was so turned off. I have not read the end of this book. I chose not to read the last chapter because I was literally upset about this book for like over a week. You can ask my husband. I kept talking about like how angry I was about this book. And I've gone and I've read all sorts of things on the internet. There's a lot of other people that are really mad about it too. There's also a lot of people who disregard it and say that the assault was, clearly showing something great. No, I don't think it was. I don't think it was necessary. And any of the arguments I've read about how putting her in that position was supposed to be like some great giving up of power or something is just disgusting. Like, everything that I've heard in defense of this part of the book is disgusting. And I have read books that have had sexual assaults in them that I felt like furthered the character development, furthered the plot in a way that did not upset me like this. And this book, no. So I recommend this book to nobody. I recommend you don't read it because just no. But yeah, that's what took a potential 5-star and brought it down to a 1. Why did it get a 1 and not just get straight DNF'd? Because I enjoyed enough of it leading up, and I felt so invested that I feel like it deserves that 1 star because there was something there. There was just also a really, really poor choice on the part of the author and all of the editors that I know read the book and all of the readers who read the book before it was put out. There was a whole string of people who made poor, poor choices, and I know I'm not the only person who feels this way. So, that is my feelings on The Magician King. I will not be reading the other book in the series. I also will not be watching the TV show on Sci-Fi because I've looked into it more and I've heard disgusting things about the show. Apparently they skin a live cat. So, no. So, if I gave a previous decent review to the Magicians and you were appalled by that, I am now appalled by past Kendra too, but until you have all the information, you just don't always know what recommendations to make. So, I don't know. I feel bad that I previously liked a thing that turned out to be horrible. But, you know, that turns out that way with a lot of things and people. You know, we think one thing about them and things seem one way and then something changes. So I think the important thing, though, is when you find those changes to be willing to change your opinion and not just overlook something because it's just one small slight in an overarching thing. No, it's a big slight and we're not going to be ignoring it, or at least I am not. So let's look at my shawl, because my shawl is a beautiful thing to talk about. This shawl section actually turned out really nice for this book. So the way my reading shawl works is there are 4 different yarns that I'm using. One for books that I read with my kids, one for books for my Life's Library subscription where I get a new book every 6 weeks, one for audiobooks that I experience by myself, and one for physical books that I experience by myself. This fell under that audiobook by myself category, and so the yarn that I'm using for that is some Cattails yarn on her DK base, and it is in the waist colorway, which is from her Wheel of Time collection. And so it's this section right here. Each of the yarns, I do a patterned row and then a row of textured single crochet for however many stars I got. As you can see, the previous book was also an audiobook, so it has the same textured row, but it got 4 stars. So there are 4 rows of textured single crochet making this nice big stripe. And here's the teeny itty bitty stripe, which is probably more than the Magician King deserves. So I also decided to add some beads to this section because I did read this book as part of Fantasy-a-thon. Fantasy-a-thon was a readathon with a number of challenges that lasted 10 days and encouraged you to read more fantasy books. So this is the first of the books that I read for that. And when I do a readathon, I've decided that I like to plunk some beads in the shawl because the shawl is a tangible reminder of the intangible reading that I do. And it helps encourage me as I go along and then acts as a cool book log. So I know when I see the bead sections that like, oh, there was a fun little, you know, readathon. And so there will usually be several beaded rows in a row. So there's more beads coming up, y'all. And thankfully, more non-terrible books. So I'm really happy with how this turned out. I like the bead choice that I made. Finding beads that I own already that would fit with the DK yarn was a trick. I also only have a limited selection of my beads with me on the trip because I thought that what I brought would fit easily, and they did not. They made the yarn split and I didn't like that. But I did have these, and I will be using some different beads of this type, which all have kind of this metallic center, so they kind of shimmer a little, and I used greens and blacks and orange for this book. It'll probably be mixed up in some of the future books, and then I just did it in every other little kind of V section. That way there's not too much weight because I did read a decent number of books during this readathon, so there's going to be a decent middle section that has beads in it. So that is where we are at so far on this shawl. This is the 3rd shawl so far for the year, which is amazing because I thought that I was going to make one shawl and it was going to be everything I read for the year, but it was not, so it's a good thing overall. If you want to see all of the books that I've read this year, you can check out the playlist here on the channel that has all the chapters of Yarn Tales, including some books that I read last year and did a different format for my shawl. And make sure you subscribe down below because I don't put my videos out on a regulated schedule, so if you don't want to miss anything, that's the way to make it just float up into your sub feed. And I will see you all next time. Bye!